Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the Industrial Revolution, right? We are now going to be wrapping up the Industrial Revolution, though, in this nice, short, and condensed flip. I know that Rhea is going to be a big fan of that, right? Being like, look at this little baby one. So we're going to actually discuss now, though, some of the positives and the negatives of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to keep going with understanding why it spread through the continent at a little bit of a different rate than it actually started in Great Britain, right? We're going to keep discussing those things, and we're also going to discuss like some very important buildings and like some other different ideas as well. But go ahead, buckle up, get after it a little bit, and watch this Frankenstein flip and actually understand what the content is going forward, okay? But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one. Industrial Revolution for some time, right? But by the 1850s, Britain just doesn't care anymore, and they just kind of start showing off, right? And that is actually demonstrated in this one very famous building called the Crystal Palace, right? Where literally by 1850, Britain's like, we got nothing to hide anymore. Come look at all of our stuff, right? And they built this huge, this massive expo center called the Crystal Palace, right? And it was made out of glass and ironwork, and it was absolutely massive. And they would literally have trade shows in there where they could show off all the different items that were being produced during the Industrial Revolution and showing how far advanced Great Britain was over everyone else, right? So the other big thing about it, though, is some of you are asking, well, Mr. Terry, is the Crystal Palace still there to this day? And well, the thing about it is, no, like it's actually not there anymore. It actually caught fire like later on in the late 1800s and stuff like that and burned down. They believe that actually it's because the thing had wooden floors that actually that's where the fire started, got so hot it melted the entire place. But as a like a little bit of a vestige of something, there is an English Premier Soccer team called Crystal Palace that's named after this entire thing, okay? So for our soccer fans in the house, there is an actual little vestige of them still sitting around, okay? Now, what about the urban worker and the working class, right? Like what's their life like? What are they going through day to day in this entire expanse of the Industrial Revolution? Is it an easy life for them, or is it a very, very hard life? Well, the big thing to actually kind of understand is that it is a really tough life, right? Because there's going to be two places that you might end up working. It's either going to be in the factories or it's going to be in the mines, right? And the factories are terrible. And we will talk about the harsh conditions of the factories right here, and we will keep going with that as we actually grow our understanding of this entire process when I see y'all next in class, okay? So y'all have a good one. I'll see y'all soon. Exactly, Mr. Terry from the past, right? Exactly, Mr. Terry from a year ago, wearing that tie that I really do enjoy, but I got to go back and like actually find a better white shirt to wear it with. Now, going into it though, left off talking about the working class, right? We talked a lot of stuff in this flip already about social classes, the expansion of the Industrial Revolution, the Crystal Palace, wow. So, but now we're getting into what was life like for this working class, right? How is the working class going to be severely like differentiated from the middle and upper class, and how are their lives going to be so much more inherently dangerous and full of hardship by comparison to the other classes, right? And then also, how is this life probably going to be a little bit worse than it was when you used to live out in the countryside, right? Now, going into it, a couple things we need to understand first and foremost. There are those two places you could end up working, the factories or the mines, right? Now, the conditions in the factories were absolutely atrocious. Shifts lasted anywhere from as long as 12 to 16 hours. Machines had absolutely no safety mechanisms or emergency turnoffs of any type. Now, what I mean by a safety mechanism is for like any of y'all that was ever like me as a kid, if you have like a top-loading washing machine, right? Like so, like you lift the lid up, right, and you throw your clothes in there, and it spins in this direction. There's a little button that I realized whenever I was little that is right there underneath the cover that if you push it down, the actual spin cycle will kick back on. But it's designed so whenever you open the lid that the spin cycle stops for your safety. These early factory machines, like these power looms and things like that people were actually operating, had no such safety mechanisms. So you're talking about people could very easily get injured by these machines, and they oftentimes did, right? Factories also had little to no ventilation, very, very little. Like the air was stagnant in there. It wasn't actually being moved around by an HVAC system or anything of the like, right? Because none of that stuff's going to actually pop up until close to the 1900s. And then also, these windows that they had were limited, right? So you had hot, stifling like factories that the machines are producing an excessive amount of heat as well, right? It's like at mass, y'all. Like people are just falling out left left and right, okay? Now, workers are also going to get sick, okay? And when they do get sick, they oftentimes got fired, right? Now, the other big thing that we need to understand is that this work was not limited to men. Early on in the Industrial Revolution, especially in the earliest phase of the Industrial Revolution, child labor was excessively used, and there was also a gender division of labor. And what we're getting at with that is you have to understand that men, women, and children had inherently different, or not inherently, had different assigned jobs, right? Women were oftentimes the people that actually ran the factory machines. Jot that down. Men were oftentimes the ones shoveling coal in a factory to feed the steam engines that actually fed the power source to the power looms themselves. And child workers were actually used to do a lot of other little things, including untangling like threads and bobbins and stuff like that from power loom machines, and then also fixing and repairing them. And their life, like in these factories, was very, very harsh. And we're oftentimes seen with, like, for example, workers would be docked pay if there was any mistakes, and oftentimes kids could even be like beaten by like the managers and the factory overseers, right? Now, life of the working class is going to continue when we actually change lenses a little bit and we look at what life was like when you were working in a mine, right? Because the Industrial Revolution is going to create a higher demand for iron and coal, because you need more iron for the railroads, for the actual locomotives. You need more coal to make these machines. You need coal you need more coal to smelt the iron to make the machines. And the vicious cycle keeps running round and round, right? The Industrial Revolution will create that higher demand, so mines are going to need to be dug at an exponential rate. Now, miners are going to be paid more, but the conditions were actually far worse than factories, right? You're working in practical darkness. You also have 500-pound mine carts that could fall backwards on you at any moment in time. Cave-ins, collapses, explosions, things like that. And another big one is a disease that you could get from working in the mines, right? Known as black lung disease, where the coal dust would actually cake up onto your actual lungs and cause a very, 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 very atrocious disease that would lead to one's death, right? Now, something else we need to also understand, though, is that at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, whole families worked in mines, okay? Whole families, as you can see right here, is a mother or maybe like a cousin or something like that, and like a couple of children right there. Entire family units entered into the mines. Your dad would literally go up to the mine operator or manager and would make a deal for you and your family, right? They'd be like, all right, you're going to pay me $12 an hour. You're going to pay my wife $7 an hour, and you're going to pay my kids $5 an hour. How's that sound? You know what I mean? And then you would all go in there together. But by the mid-1800s, it was just men, right? Like, it was just men, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to see an excessive amount of liberal reform, okay? And like, you're going to start beginning to see these new political perspectives popping up, which we'll talk about in the next phase of this unit, right? But classical liberals are going to demand that there be changes to working conditions to help out the working class, right? Now, what they don't realize is this inherent or unintentionally kind of really changes up society for the worse in a lot of ways. But we'll get to that. It's always better to prevent people from dying underground in a mine. But I'm saying, like, it's interesting because they began to say that women couldn't work underground anymore. And so that actually took work away from women. And a lot of it was actually just inspired by the fact that a lot of women were working underground, like, with limited clothing because it was so hot, right? Like, so like now, but going into it, they're going to end up passing this thing called the Mines Act of 1888. And it's actually going to prevent the actual working of underground of men. Now, I probably got the year wrong on that, but it's also known as the Mines Act, right? Now, child labor in the Industrial Revolution is going to be a heavy theme as well. Originally, children were actually some of the earliest factory workers. They actually were drawn from orphanages and foundling hospitals because early on, as you remember, a lot of these actual factories popped up in the countryside first, right? In the earliest part of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the factories were out towards the countryside next to a river or a water source to create power on a water wheel that was used for the water frame. Well, the thing about it is that oftentimes these early factories reminded a lot of English citizens of poorhouses, is what they're called, or basically large, very, very big government-funded workhouses, right? And a lot of people were like, I don't want to work in that. That's really scary. And so they had to actually find workers, and they pulled from orphanages, and they actually filled the earliest factories with children. And as the revolution advances, families and children will actually begin to enter into the work together. Now, children had some of the most dangerous jobs, right? They started working as early as 5 years old. they worked hauling mine carts and opening air vents inside the mines, and then also they repaired factory machines. Now, what I mean by that, when we say repair, I don't mean I was sticking them in there with a wrench. What actually would happen is, as you can see, all these little strings right here for this power loom are attached to these bobbins. Sometimes they would get tangled up, right? And so children would have to reach their hands inside of the power looms and actually untangle the threads, right? Because their hands were small enough to get in there. But when that machine kicked back on, if your hand got wrapped up in a piece of actual string or something like that, you could actually be severely injured. So you saw a lot of child injuries and stuff like that in the mines and factories as well. Now, so is the Industrial Revolution, when you're looking at it, is it inherently a good thing or is it an inherently bad thing, right? Well, the thing about it is both, okay? There are positives to the Industrial Revolution, and then there are also stark negatives. Now, some of the positives include the fact that there are more jobs, right? If there's more jobs, then there's going to be an increase in wages, so people are going to be making more money. Costs are also going to go down on a lot of products, which is a connection that a lot of y'all made, right? Textiles are going to become cheaper. Anything produced in a factory is going to become cheaper and more accessible to people in more classes. What you're also going to see, though, as well as a massive positive, is the rise in labor unions, right? What labor unions are organizations of workers that come together to fight for workers' rights, right? Labor unions are going to actually be seen early on in the Industrial Revolution as these things called amalgamated societies, and the idea is that workers would come together and begin to demand things from their from the factory owners and the mine owners, right? And what are some methods that labor unions would use to get these things accomplished? Write these things down. They would sometimes go on strike, or they might boycott goods coming from this area, right? And we'll talk about that, what that means a little bit more in class, right? But now the stark negatives to this thing is we need to understand is that by the 1800s coming to a close, wages are going to begin to do what's called stagnate, right? Now, a stagnation in wages means they plateau, right? Like they go up, 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 and they plateau off, right? And they don't stop they stop rising at such a dramatic rate. And it's going to lead to a fixed amount of labor cost that's going to actually hurt the lower class in a very large way. Also, we need to understand that the Industrial Revolution is going to lead to the death of children and people in general, right? People are going to be injured and disfigured, like this child right here who has an injury from one of the power looms kicking back on when he was trying to repair it and fix it, right? Terrible working conditions are a massive negative. And then also the big one, pollution, right? Pollution is going to be absolutely terrible. You're going to see human waste spilling into the Thames River in England, and it's going to be so bad that pollution apparently even dictated the evolution of animals, right? So that right there is what's known as an English pepper moth, right? Pepper moths are actually supposed to be this color right here. They're supposed to be this peppery white and dark blotched spots moth, and they use this camouflage pattern to blend into trees inside of Great Britain, right? Now, an interesting thing about these pepper moths, though, is that these ones are the ones that are supposed to live. These dark black ones are supposed to die because they're easier for birds to see. But after the Industrial Revolution, coal dust caked all over these different trees, right? All over trees throughout Great Britain because of all the coal being used in the factories. And what's going to happen is now these guys were the ones that were standing out and getting eaten by birds, and the black ones were the actual ones blending in, right? So literally, pollution from the Industrial Revolution even dictated the natural world, right? So we're going to pick up right there when we actually get back into the class, and we're going to start talking about a lot of big political perspectives when I see y'all again, okay? Y'all have a good one.